This Mind Body Love was actually started by the same guys who started Trip. They arrived back in Canada to Toronto, and they started Trip, and then a year later they moved out west and they started Mind Body Love here. So there's kind of an interesting historical connection between our groups. So Mind Body Love was started in 1996. It really kind of just came out of the scene. A bunch of the scene in Vancouver back in that time was actually sort of a bunch of fairly organized groups. Gosh, I'm going to blank on all their names now. But anyway, they started doing this make peace not war parties, which were some public parties out in front of the art gallery and in front of City Hall and stuff like that. And it was definitely a community that was very interested in psychedelics and in entheogens. And some of the people in the community noticed that some other people in the community were struggling or getting hurt sometimes just from using in a way that was maybe not sort of judicious or safe. And so people started saying, like, we should do something ourselves. We should find some sort of a way to like take care of ourselves, to educate each other. And there was also some concern around sexual health issues, HIV and stuff like that. And so it really was as a kind of a community-based response to that. So it was very much sort of for us, by us as well. The community is a little different from your standard rave community. So it wasn't so much super young people. It was a broader age section. And when we started, most of those people were in their 20s and 30s. Now it's sort of 30s and 40s, and maybe if we were breeding, we would all have kids who would be ravers. But the approach right from the very beginning was taken as this is going to be sort of a community capacity building approach. Although we initially started out doing things that looked a lot like what Trip does or what Dan Safe does, having lots of pamphlets at parties and things like that. So where we really took off was the scene kind of died here. There was sort of two waves of crystal meth that came through town. They affected a lot of the promoters. And so there was also a lot of zoning changes by the city. I think they really didn't like the idea of people having fun. And so the whole scene kind of collapsed just from the loss of venue and from a loss of some of the kind of movers and shakers who would actually make stuff happen. And eventually, a small group of us got together and said, okay, so what are we going to do now? We've been doing these information outreach at parties. We just seem to reach the same people. They either come over there on the table or a bunch of Dan Safe flyers, so people would come and collect the flyers like hockey cards. Or else the only people we would talk to would be people who wanted to kind of geek out about the latest designer psychedelic molecule. And so we didn't really feel like we were reaching the people who we wanted to reach, and maybe that was just the nature of the scene. So we started moving towards doing more chill spaces and trying to, initially what we were thinking was, well, maybe the real problem is drug-facilitated sexual assault, and there are all these young women here, and all the guys are hitting on them, and maybe what they really need is somewhere in the party where they can kind of chill out and the pressure's off and they can just have a good time. So we started making, a really nice chill space, lots of cool lights, lots of fabrics, and all sorts of nice things around. We'd make psychedelic coloring in patterns and then glow-in-the-dark cookie pens and things. And we were convinced that it was the girls who were going to come. Well, after about our third party and babysitting a group of 20 teenage boys, we realized that we were onto something. But this wasn't quite working out the way we thought. And what we found from just chatting with... So we also decided we didn't want to do education in a traditional model. So we thought also by making the space, people would come hang out, we'd sit down and talk with them, and we could engage them in a discussion around where did you get your drugs, what do you need to know about what you're doing, and things like that. And as I said, it was mostly boys who came. And what we found was that here were these guys, they were 15, 16, 17, all this pressure to be adults and to be running around after girls and all that, and all they really wanted to do was be high, dance their asses off, hang out with their friends, color in some cool pictures, and it was very, very effective. And then the scene continued to change in Vancouver, and actually there really were no parties that were happening that weren't huge commercial parties. And around the same time, we applied to the Drug Strategy Community Initiatives Fund. They put out a call looking for really creative community-driven projects. And our initial project was, we're going to do this thing with school kids making the transition from junior school to high school. And by the way, tucked off on the side, we're going to do this outreach at parties. And Health Canada came back and said, the school stuff's really boring. We see that all the time. We're really interested in this party stuff. So why don't you rewrite your grants and just make it about the party outreach? So we did, and they gave us $40,000 over 2 years, which you couldn't believe. And as a result of that, we were able to sort of take this approach that we've been working on and take it out to a whole lot of the different music festivals that were happening around BC. And the largest one of these was the Shambhala Music Festival. So we also ran into a lot of resistance. People would say things like, geez, you guys are just going to bring the vibe down, you know, coming and talking about harm reduction and stuff like that. So some festivals like Soundwave out on the West Coast weren't interested at all. And then other festivals were incredibly interested. So Shambhala is a really huge festival. It's about 12,000 people. It's in a remote rural BC location, sort of between Nelson and the US border. And it's on a farm in a mountain valley on the banks of the Selma River. So it's a very enclosed location. And it's also probably the most sort of diverse event like this in Western Canada in terms of genres. It really covers every genre of electronic music. And it runs, depending on whether people come on the official day or they come earlier, it's anywhere from 4 to 7 days. So people are partying a long time. And they had a lot of trouble with issues related to problems people got into from taking drugs. So we've been at Shambhala since 2005. The first year we did it was Sandra Carpetis and myself. Sandra's involved at the Albergain Therapy House here in Vancouver. And we took a group of people up, and at the time we called it the Cosmic Kiva, which we thought was a super clever name, but of course nobody knew what the hell it was. And so we had to change the name. So now we call it Sanctuary, because that's something that people really seem to understand. And the Shambhala Music Festival was very skeptical. They agreed to give us 1 free ticket for each volunteer, but they were really skeptical. They wouldn't cover any expenses. And after 1 year, they were utterly convinced. They said, we don't ever want to do this festival again without you guys here. So we've been back ever since. After the drug strategy money ran out in 2007, the Shambhala Festival has funded us, and they funded us very, very well. They give every volunteer 2 tickets, 2 free tickets, which is worth almost $500. They give us a budget for supplies and stuff like that. And we actually have a really large group that got there. Probably, this year we're probably between 70 and 80 volunteers. And we work round the clock the entire time the festival is on. So the results of us being there is that about 600 to 800 people a year will actually come through the space. And often people come through and say, oh, I'm going to go really hard tonight. I just want to see where I'm going to end up. Or they want to know what's this sort of cluster of tents and psychedelic lights and things under this cluster of old-growth trees right in the middle of the festival space. We deal with about 100 what we would call serious cases a year. So these are people who are down. We work very, very closely with first aid and security, and essentially we take a sort of continuum of care approach. And we all work together to try and make the environment a really supportive environment for people to have a good time. And a bunch of unexpected things happened. So when we got there, what we noticed was that first aid was really hostile to us. And their attitude was, you know, stupid ravers. Taking too many drugs, getting high, like they caused us so much trouble. And mostly what we discovered was that they had all this anxiety about the fact of what are we going to do if somebody comes in? We're used to, you know, triage them, assess them, stick on the Band-Aid, and off they're gone. But you've got somebody who comes in who's passing out on G, or who's having a really bad acid trip, and they need taken care of for several hours. And first aid was not set up to do this, and neither was security. So they would sometimes restrain people, and it just was really not a good scene. What they discovered by having us there was all of a sudden they could be first responders again. And paradoxically, they ended up taking much longer with people than they were doing before, because there was no pressure. They knew the moment they needed to hand someone over, they could hand the person over to us and we would take them. So this was a very unexpected thing. And for the security people who had very much of a sort of law enforcement mindset, I think, because they were all professional security, their attitude, at first they were like, why are you taking so much trouble? This is a huge amount of effort. Like, this doesn't make any sense. And I think what they started to realize was that, you know, trippers are people too. These weren't just sort of fucked up ravers. These were actually, you know, people who were possibly injured or who needed some kind of help. And so it really shifted their attitude in terms of how they sort of respected partygoers. And now typically if they go out on a call, they'll take someone from the sanctuary with them to support them in terms of dealing with the kind of the psychedelic aspects of whatever might be going on. And through doing lots of trainings, we've probably trained well over 200 people across BC and Alberta. And now it's become a kind of a cultural norm for some of the